from the headquarters of Telesat English in Quito, Ecuador. This is From the South, and I'm Emika Omoli. Welcome. Investigators are trying to find out what caused the fire that destroyed Brazil's National Museum. Activists are blaming government funding cuts. Police officers say the building didn't seem to have a sprinkler system and had suffered neglect. Investigators are looking into whether an electrical fault was to blame or if a paper lantern landed on the museum's roof.
I think it's essential that there be clarification about the causes of the fire. And at this time, the federal police are concentrated on that. We need to know exactly what happened and what caused this fire. After that, it will also be possible to clarify who is responsible and understand what exactly happened and who is responsible.
Museum curators have been the first to go through the ashes and collect the remains of the collection. They wanted to make sure that the artifacts wouldn't be confused with debris. The museum housed more than 20 million items, including Brazil's oldest human fossil and meteorites. The government says it will seek international help and spend $3.6 billion in rebuilding the collection.
I was in a rush to get in there because I knew how to recognize the meteorites. I knew where they were, so that I could try to recover some. They were brought out of the ashes like a real phoenix.
Well, a group of students gathered in Rio de Janeiro to protest against government neglect of the museum. They held placards reading "National Catastrophe" and "Culture in Ashes."
The National Museum had very important items. It attracted attention on an international level. There was a lot of research which will now come to an end history will be erased. With this, our memory gets erased too.
The fire has been caused by years of neglect by the federal government. Our anthropology program suffered absurd budget cuts these last 2 years. My anthropology class, for example, suffered a 70% cut from 1 year to the next.
While staying in Brazil, vice presidential candidate Fernando Haddad has visited former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva in Curitiba. Haddad wants to define the Workers' Party's strategy after the Electoral Supreme Court banned Lula from running for the presidency. The PT insists Lula is its candidate, although Haddad could replace him. The Electoral Court has banned any campaign ad in which Lula appears. Argentinians are waking up to news that nearly half of the government is to be shut down in a massive austerity package. Meanwhile, the finance minister is due to ask the IMF in Washington to pay a bailout loan early. Hundreds of Argentinians, many of them pensioners, blocked streets in Buenos Aires on Monday evening. They're angry at President Mauricio Macri's cost-cutting. The government's scrambling to hold Argentina's economy together as its currency, the peso, continues its downward slide.
I feel huge indignation, an overacted rehearsed speech that doesn't take responsibility for the disaster they caused because they have made us poorer while they send the money abroad.
Trade unions have been out on the march as well. Members camped outside the presidential palace. The decision to cut 10 government ministries means thousands more people will lose their jobs. The government also announced new taxes on farm exports. But that hasn't stopped the peso from falling against the US dollar. It lost another 2.6% on Monday.
Halving the ministries means a really dire situation for the public administration and the state. They're reducing the state, they're shrinking it, the state is losing its power to regulate.
Their plan is basically to fulfill their commitments to international creditors, to comply with the International Monetary Fund, to give them control of the public accounts.
Let's get more on the currency crisis now in this report.
After a series of economic adjustments, Argentine President Mauricio Macri addressed the nation. However, people were expecting more than just a speech. They were expecting him to change his policies.
Esto no se podía hacer de un momento a otro.
This can't all change in an instant. It's a gradual process. We had to change many things that were not favorable for everyone, but were necessary. What we did was to ask the world for some help.
Para el bien de todos.
After his short presidential address, Macri explained why he decided to close down 10 ministries. He also confirmed he would raise tariffs on soy and other grains. After his measures were announced, the Minister of Economy, Nicolas Duhavne, gave a speech as well.
Por supuesto, también debemos reconocer que hemos cometido
We must admit that we made some mistakes. Argentina's weak position forced us into this situation. Our intention is to bring solution to all the challenges we are facing. At the same time, we must take care of the most vulnerable section of the society, reduce the taxes and the fiscal deficit. We didn't take enough care of the fiscal issues before, and that has greatly affected Argentina in comparison to those countries who have balanced fiscal record.
Duhavne promised a balanced budget after a high fiscal deficit this year. Public education funding was badly affected following corruption allegations against some government officials.
In 2019, instead of aiming for the original goal of 1.3% of deficit, we will work for fiscal balance and not in the payment of interests. This means that we will save $6 billion that we won't need to return to the international market. In 2020, we will have more than fiscal balance. We will have a surplus of 1%, which will save us another $5.2 billion.
With these weak measures taken by the government, experts say the officials want to dollarize the economy. Experts also fear the way it can affect the country.
For that to happen, by our calculations, the dollar would have to cost 85 pesos. At that level, our domestic market will be ruined. It would lead to the collapse of Argentinian society. It's not viable.
While these changes by the government are meant to stabilize the fluctuating market, the peso remains historically low. The Ministry of Economy, Duhavne, will be traveling to Washington to renegotiate the loan agreement with the IMF.
The final government report of outgoing Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto has been met with the same anger that he faced throughout his administration.
Only a few curious people waited outside the National Palace as President Enrique Peña Nieto was giving his final report on the government. Peña Nieto holds the record for the lowest approval rating for a president in recent history.
He governed for himself and for his family because the country is just as bad, if not worse.
He worked for the rich and for corporations, not for the people.
Standing before his cabinet, he was forced to admit that he failed to fulfill one of the people's main requests, to fight record-high levels of violence that have left more than 150,000 dead and more than 30,000 disappeared.
I'm aware that we didn't reach our goal of regaining peace and safety for all Mexicans.
Days before the speech, as new legislators started their term, mostly from the left-wing Morena party, demands for justice were heard for those who disappeared in Ayotzinapa in 2014. President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador did not make an appearance, but his incoming finance secretary named Santiago Nieto as head of the Financial Intelligence Unit. Nieto was previously fired from the prosecutor's office for investigating foreign financing in the presidential election campaign of Enrique Peña Nieto.
At this moment, we are ranked 135th in the Transparency International Corruption Index as one of the most corrupt nations in the world.
Corruption is one of the biggest issues the Peña Nieto government leaves for the incoming administration. He leaves office without explaining the dramatic increase in government spending and the country's skyrocketing deficit.
We'll take a short break now. Join us in a few moments.
In South America and the Caribbean, we face challenges, looking for ways of contributing to solutions to the nations. with a uniting feeling, though before the attack of those imposing themselves, we defend an ideal of an inspiring struggle. We are together, preserving our traditions, integrated, being one South.
The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transform the world today. Mondays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. In Honduras, 2 boys taking part in a student protest have been found dead. Now, a leaked video supposedly showing the 2 students being arrested just before they were killed has caused outrage.
In the week before the murder of Gerson Daniel Mesa and Mario Enrique Suarez, there were several students' protests against price increases.
We have 3 demands: the reduction of fuel prices to the previous one and immediate freezing. The next point, that the previous transport fare returns.
Mario Enrique Suarez had participated in this protest, and days later he was dead, along with his friend. Hours later, the footage, which allegedly shows them being arrested, began to circulate.
Esto tiene todas las características de una ejecución arbitraria.
This has all the features of an execution. These young men were dragged out of their houses, then, according to forensics, tortured in an unknown place, tied up, and then murdered with a firearm.
Immediately, a police spokesperson denied it, arguing that they were criminal gangs wearing fake uniforms.
The name time shown in these beds are bigger than the officially used by the Technical Criminal Investigation Bureau, in the same way the color is different from the official yellow shade.
Meanwhile, in the school where Mario studied, fear is in the air among students, teachers, and parents.
We're shocked because what we are living is violence taking the lives of the young away. Whether it comes from pseudo-police groups or from organized crime that breaks the law, we're worried about one thing. Until some years ago, the concept of youth was respected.
Despite the fear of violence the state is using, students are determined to make a stand. A protest is expected in front of the UN office.
Hooded assailants have attacked students of the National Autonomous University in Mexico. The students were protesting against the recent murder of female student Miranda Mendoza Flores. They were met by young people hiding their faces. The masked group was said to be hired by authorities to break up the student protests. Clashes then broke out in the middle of the campus as both sides faced off with sticks and rocks. Students had previously asked the university to get rid of the violent groups that have infiltrated campuses.
In the middle of our meeting, these fake students, from Group 31 as they like to be called, attacked us. We fought back to defend ourselves, but now there are a number of underage students being treated for injuries sustained during the attack. We place responsibility on all university authorities who use these tactics to try and silence us, and let them know that we will fight their repression with unity.
Guyana's Ministry of Education is assuring parents that all schools will reopen on Tuesday after teachers walked off the job. The teachers' strike closed about 34 schools on Monday, the first day of the new school term. Other schools were short-staffed, forcing parents to collect their children. Negotiations between the Guyana Teachers Union and the government have hit a stalemate. Teachers are demanding a 40% wage increase. The government says it can't afford it. Unions in Trinidad and Tobago are gearing up for a national strike this Friday, but the government is threatening legal action if certain essential service workers walk off the job. The Minister of Public Administration warned that the armed forces, healthcare workers and teachers could face a fine or imprisonment. The unions have vowed to ramp up their actions if the government follows through on its threats.
We stand firmly in solidarity with all the teachers and the problems they have. And if you want to exacerbate the problems that you have already created, just touch one of these trade unions in Trinidad and Tobago.
A mass poisoning has taken place in Chile. Our correspondent in Santiago, Valenzuela, has more.
I am at the headquarters of the former National Congress located in the capital of Chile, where the Commission of Health is meeting to discuss the massive intoxication that happened in the coastal zone of the 5th region in Puncuncaví and Quintero. Just a few weeks ago, at least 30 students from the schools of this locality had to go to the health centers due to poisoning. They complained of nausea and paralysis. But now, the number of victims has increased to almost 300 people. In these localities, poisoning cases are the highest in the country. Some abortions due to intoxication have also been reported here. This toxic cloud is suspected to be because of an industrial park located in the area since the 60s.
Valenzuela reporting there. Well, the school year in Cuba is beginning on a calmer note, though. During this new term, teachers and students will have a chance to debate on proposed constitutional reforms in the country. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel spoke at an opening ceremony at the Rafael Maria de Mendive School. The building's been reinaugurated 150 years after Cuba's national hero, José Martí, studied at the institution.
We recognize that we have some problems, yet in order for every school to be able to become as great as this school we are opening today, that will require the joint efforts of teachers, directors and staff. I think it's an inspiring beginning of classes, and it's one of the things we assure every year at the beginning of September, that there are schools and teachers for all Cuban children.
Former Chilean President Michelle Bachelet has taken office as the new UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Bachelet says she will do everything possible to support victims and human rights defenders. In her first statement as High Commissioner, she called on Myanmar to free the 2 Reuters journalists jailed on Monday. Bolivia's President Evo Morales and his Peruvian counterpart Martin Vizcarra have met in the Bolivian city of Copija. Our correspondent in Bolivia, Freddy Morales, has more.
The President of Bolivia, Evo Morales, and the President of Peru, Martin Vizcarra, have finished the 4 binational cabinet in the Bolivian city of Cobija. From the year 2015, this cabinet raises solutions to the problems of its extensive common border of about 1,200 kilometers. The ministers of both states also met during the weekend. The heads of states have reviewed previous agreements and also signed new ones. The project of a bioceanic train stood out. This train would join the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean with a corridor that will pass through Bolivia in an extension of almost 3,700 kilometers. It will demand almost $14 billion of investment. They also discussed security issues, integration, economic development and environment. The 2 countries share Lake Titicaca, the highest navigable lake in the world.
Freddy Morales reporting there. Well, Venezuela will begin to pilot a new system for selling gasoline on Tuesday. It is part of the government's attempts to stabilize the economy. The scheme will be tested at gas stations in 8 border states. For decades, gasoline has been almost free in Venezuela, leading to massive smuggling, especially into Colombia. The new system will cut subsidies and raise the price to near international levels. Many Venezuelans will still get cheap fuel if they produce their homeland card.
This new system aims to cut the hands off of Colombian scourgers who steal our gasoline and steal billions of dollars of gasoline that belongs to Venezuela.
Well, President Nicolas Maduro also says 600,000 Venezuelans have migrated in the last 2 years. Maduro was providing an update on the progress of the economic recovery program. He's asking Venezuelans to support the government's efforts to improve the economy. He invited those who've left Venezuela to return home. He also added that at least 90% of those who emigrate leave with money in their hands, often after selling property. Time for another short break. Join us in a few moments.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur. With developing events being presented through analysis. Our coverage transcends borders. With renowned journalist Walter Martinez.
Salud, amigos, tripulantes de nuestra querida, contaminada y única nave espacial.
Dossier. Weekdays. Only on Telesur.
Y ponga usted las cámaras, señor director.
Welcome back. A journalist from New Zealand was held at a police station in the island nation of Nauru after her press pass was revoked. According to state broadcaster Television New Zealand, Barbara Drever spoke to refugees without permission. Nauru's government said she breached her visa conditions as she only had permission to report on a conference. The island nation is sensitive about foreign journalists reporting on asylum seekers sent there by the Australian government. Nike has unveiled American football player Colin Kaepernick as the face for the company's Just Do It 30th anniversary campaign. Nike revealed Kaepernick was still on its endorsement roster despite him being out of the NFL for almost 2 years. The campaign has divided public opinion, with some destroying their Nike merchandise in protest. In 2016, Kaepernick refused to stand for the national anthem to denounce police brutality against African Americans. Some economists fear that Spain will not be able to rein in its debt. This year, the country will be tapping into its Social Security Reserve Fund to pay out increased pensions, but this will cause Spain's budget deficit to rise by €1 billion.
For the past 7 years, pensions have only risen by the legal minimum of 0.25%. This, while the cost of living continued to rise. To the over 8 million retirees in Spain, this means a dramatic loss of purchasing power.
Everything is always cuts and problems, paid by the workers, the pensioners, by public health and education. We're losing all that. Everything is getting privatized. This must stop now.
Spain has been hit by huge protests. The government agreed to increase pensions by 1.6% in 2018. This will be retroactive from 2017, but state pensioners says this is still not good enough.
On a €700 pension, they increased €10, but at the same time, electricity increased in 30%, also water and gas. All we want is pensions to be updated, to use the money that's meant for the people's budget.
But the move to raise pensions was met with backlash from some quarters. A subsequent increase in Spain's deficit is being attributed to the largest pension payout the country has seen in years.
There's a chance that this could keep increasing because of the pre-agreements applied a week ago with the government, included a revaluation of the pension rates, and it means that they must increase 230 million euros for each 0.1% increase.
An increase in employment and salaries would help. Instead, unions and other organizations support pensioners on combining public budget for private pension plans.
De pensiones privados. Adriana Cardoso y Gemma Segura, Telesur, Madrid.
We have an update on the stabbings that took place in Amsterdam last week. Here's more on that story and a look at some more stories from around the world.
A man who stabbed two others at Amsterdam Central Station last week has been identified as 19-year-old Jawad S. The teen has German residency and is originally from Afghanistan. He travelled to Amsterdam to carry out the attack. During questioning, he said he was motivated by the Dutch anti-Islamic politician Geert Wilders and his continuous attack on Islam. Wilders recently cancelled a competition of cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad. The attacker is still in police custody. Employees of the healthcare giant Kaiser Permanente protested against planned cuts in Oakland, United States. More than 1,000 workers took to the streets to denounce what they say is corporate greed. The company wants to outsource 96 pharmacy warehouse workers and 43 licensed vocational nurses across California.
We're here because Kaiser's wants to outsource a lot of jobs. My job in particular is in jeopardy. They want to outsource our warehouse, so we're here to let them know they're not going to do it without a fight.
Tens of thousands of people mourned the death of Alexander Zakharchenko, leader of the Donetsk People's Republic in Ukraine. The rebel leader died in a blast at a coffee shop last Friday along with his bodyguard. 12 people were wounded in the attack. The Russians have said his death is aimed at derailing international peace talks on the fragile country.
More than 1 million people have been warned to evacuate their homes as Japan faces its strongest typhoon in decades. Typhoon Jebi is reported to be the most powerful in the country in 25 years. Heavy winds tore off parts of a train station roof in Kyoto. So far, there are no casualties. We've come to the end of this news brief. For more background to some of the stories we've been covering, have a look at telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram for Telesur English. I'm Emike Omolu. Thank you for watching.